Hi guys, Alisha here, and today we are going to be doing something a little bit differently. Usually in my videos, I talk about a concept, whether psychologically or politically, and we kind of discuss that and consider it. Today, I'm going to be doing something more or less along the lines of a virtual debate. Now, I'm not going to be going back and forth with anyone, but I'm going to be looking at a political speaker's video and kind of talk about kind of create a rebuttal to it. So the person we're going to be talking about today is Candace Owens. Now hopefully in the future, depending on how this goes, we're going to be doing more videos like this. But on June 3rd, today is June 11th, Candace Owens published a video where she basically says that she's not going to consider George Floyd a martyr and that she kind of discredits the Black Lives Matter movement. So we're going to jump into that video and we're going to take a look at her argument and we're going to kind of talk about her argument as a whole. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hello, Facebook family. I have decided to do this video. It has been weighing very heavily on my heart and on my mind as well. And it was something that I wanted to say early on, but there were so many emotions and so much pressure for me to go with the popular opinion about who George Floyd was. And sometimes it can be difficult when there are just so many external pressures to say what you believe. And this was an instance where I felt like my silence would have been better in the beginning, but the more that I think about it, I realize that we are being sold a lot of lies, and at the detriment to the Black community, at the detriment to the white community, and at the detriment to America as a whole. So I want to come out and say that I do not support George Floyd and the media depiction of him as a...
So, it's interesting to see how she starts off this video. So, it's common knowledge that Candace Owens is a political speaker. She talks about politics, and she's made her livelihood on her political speaking. So, kind of as a person coming in and watching this who does not necessarily just support Candace Owens, I kind of find it interesting that she would start her argument by saying that, I had all of these emotions and I was scared to say anything, but now I'm not going to let my fear dictate me, and I'm going to just say it. From an argumentative standpoint, I would really say that that's a pandering chip. It seems like she's coming out and saying, don't victimize me, or don't victimize me. I'm coming out and I'm saying something really hard, so if you come down and condemn me, you're the bad guy. It works on that level for the people who support her, and it kind of delegitimizes anyone who's against her, because all of a sudden now she's coming out with the unpopular opinion. It's an interesting way to go about the beginning of the video, but I think it is something that should be mentioned. She's setting up the video from the stance that I'm saying an unpopular opinion, though my opinion is right, and here's the reason why. So let's just jump back into the video.
As a martyr for Black America, I'm going to explain why, and I hope that some of you guys will understand where I'm coming from. I have spent a considerable amount of time reading a lot of Black authors that I think are some of the most brilliant Black Americans breathing. Walter Williams, Shelby Steele, Thomas Sowell, and I recently came across something that was an idea that was planted into my head by Shelby Steele, and it has been something that I cannot forget. It is something that will stick with me for the rest of my life, and it is something that I hope for the Black Americans that are watching will stick with you for the rest of your life. Shelby Steele said that the Black community is unique from other communities. Our culture is unique from other communities because we are the only community that caters to the bottom denominator of our society. Now let me explain what that means. It means to say that not every Black American is a criminal, not every Black American is committing crimes, but we are unique in that we are the only people that fight and scream and demand support and justice for the people in our community that are up to no good.
Okay, I'm going to stop the video here, and this is an interesting concept to discuss. When I consider, and I start talking about this concept, the idea that Black people cater to the bottom denominator of their social group, or their cultural group. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you have or you are a people that is discriminated against, it's not really catering to the bottom denominator of your people to want to stand out against discrimination. Sure, they, the bottom denominator, who are committing crimes, are committing crimes, yet theoretically, considering the concept of racism, they are being targeted the most because they're already considered, if you're going along the idea that already black people are considered, to a degree, a villain. So if you're at the bottom denominator of your cultural standing, and you're already considered a villain simply because of your color, at the end of the day, you're compounding that because you're already at the bottom, and now you're a villain simply because of your color. So I don't think it's a very difficult concept to grasp around why black Americans who are at a higher kind of socioeconomical level, why they would be outraged to see people below them being treated poorly. Not to mention the fact that they themselves are being discriminated against to a certain degree. I mean, at this point, Candace Owens is basically saying for black people to thrive, they need to cast aside all the people below them and just say, oh, we're not those people. Don't judge us that way. I mean, theoretically, one, that's kind of cold to just kind of drop other people, but it also just doesn't make sense. How are people going to just say, oh no, we're not associated with them, and then all of a sudden think that somehow that they're going to have better representation within the criminal justice system? I mean, that's kind of a difficult thing to say. Not to mention the fact that, considering population density, black Americans have the highest poverty percentage of any other racial group in the United States. Black Americans make up 13.4% of the general population, and of that, 20.8% of that population is considered under the poverty line. Not to mention the fact that white Americans, who represent 60.4% of the general population, only have 10.1% of that being impoverished. Asians make up 5.9% of the general population, and 10.1% of that is in the poverty line. And Hispanics make up 18.3% of the general population, and of that, 17.6% of them are under the poverty line. So it's kind of difficult to say that black people are the only cultural group that try to pull up and pick up the lower denominator group of them, especially considering the fact that we already know that they have the highest poverty density of any other of any other racial group in this country. It just, to me, it's a weak argument. But let's continue.
You would be hard pressed to find, a Jewish person who has spent 5 stints in prison, who commits a crime and dies while committing a crime, and that the Jewish people champion and demand justice for. You will be hard-pressed to find this in white America. You'll be hard-pressed to find this even in Latino America. If there is a...
Again, just kind of rephrasing the fact that Hispanics, white, Jewish, and Asian all have much lower poverty lines to begin with. It's interesting that she kind of comes out with a Jew, especially considering the fact that after World War II, there were a lot of reparations for the Jews, and Jews came into America, and even Jews who were in America had wealth with them. When you look at racism, you really have to consider the economics of the situation. When you boil everything down, white Americans have a better economical standpoint than black Americans. Hispanic Americans have a better economical standpoint than black Americans. Asians do, and so do Jews do. So at the end of the day, you already see the issue. And then you can say, oh, well, the black people got themselves into this mess. Well, at the end of the day, black Americans were slaves for a long time. Now, I'm not necessarily saying, or trying to forget the history and try to say that there weren't a more broad slavery breakdown between races, but specifically black people, even when they were freed, they were given nothing. So they had to start everything for themselves. Not to mention the fact that many of them lived in areas in the United States where Americans were bitter because they lost the war, and sense of livelihood was destroyed. Black Americans played a huge role in the Southern economy. Not to mention the fact that if you look at history, there are a lot of historians that would say that the Civil War was never about slavery, but was actually about economics, which means that you don't even have any true proponents for the black people, because the North didn't like that the South was making money, and the North wanted to cripple the South by taking away the slaves that gave them that money. So you're already saying that when Black Americans were freed, it was never really, or to a degree, it wasn't really about freeing them, and they didn't really have any support or help from other racial groups or economical groups from this country. So you're already saying that people are bitter towards these Black Americans, and then somehow, and they have nothing, but then somehow, in the course of approximately, 150 years, that they are supposed to bring themselves up from absolutely nothing, and it's supposed to be okay now? Like, honestly, that's a very harsh thing to try to say, but let's get back into the video.
Person that is spent multiple times in prison, you are not going to see a bunch of Latinos coming out demanding justice for this person, even if, and I want to be very clear, what I'm saying is not any defense for Derek Chauvin. I hope...
Okay, sorry, I keep pausing it, but just kind of going back to that defense of the Latinos not having support for people in their racial group, I personally think that I don't have a statistic to back this up, but I do think this is incredibly wrong. And my reasoning for thinking this is when I went to the protest a few days ago, it was not comprised of just black people. And listening and being around the Hispanics at this protest, the majority of them, if not most of them, all felt that they themselves as a racial group were being underrepresented, and that they were being racially, they had racial prejudice against them. So I don't understand where you're coming from, the idea that, oh, all Hispanics are just fine and Hispanics don't experience the concept of racism. Like, that's just unbelievably untrue. And the truth of the matter is, Hispanics are also outraged by the fact of their own racial injustice, or against the racial injustices committed against them. So I don't understand where this argument is coming from. As far as I understand, this is just false information.
Derek Chauvin gets the justice that he deserves to be, implemented upon him, and that the family of George Floyd deserves justice for the way that he died. But I also am not going to accept the narrative that this is the best the black community has to offer. For whatever reason, it has become fashionable over the last 5 or 6 years for us to turn criminals into heroes overnight. And it is something that I find to be despicable, and it is something that I refuse to stand by any longer, and I am not going to play a part in it, no matter how much pressure comes from black liberals and black conservatives as some token of people wanting you to believe that this is the only way you can be black, and you have to say this was wrong, and that this person was amazing.
Sorry guys for the break, I had an issue with the camera. So she's now coming out and she's ultimately saying that George Floyd should not be considered a martyr. And she's going to continue to back this up with facts about George Floyd. As far as I'm concerned, is to essentially demonize him, but I'll talk about it when it comes. She's saying that George Floyd should not be considered a martyr, but honestly, there are some people who are seeing George Floyd as a martyr, and I'm not necessarily going to disagree with that, but I do see her point in this situation. But ultimately, though, it's not really about who George Floyd is. It's about what happened to him. George Floyd was treated terribly. He was killed in a horrendous way. Now, I'm going to let the video keep going, and we're going to talk about this more. But to kind of just come out and not totally say that he deserved it, but also say that he shouldn't be, commemorated and considered for it, like that upsets me personally.
Has been arrested. So that is not the reason I'm not discussing that, is because that is not something that has been misconstrued in the media. He has been turned into the devil that he is, and there is no reason for us to harp on that any longer, because white Americans are not uplifting Derek Chauvin as a victim or pretending that he's an amazing human being. But George Floyd is being uplifted as an amazing human being. And for those of you who have not yet seen the clips and did not pursue or wait for more clips to come out, first and foremost, George Floyd at the time of his arrest was high on fentanyl, and he was high on methamphetamine. This came back in both of his autopsy reports. If you pursue the 911 transcript, you can see the person describing somebody who is out of their mind high, and which is what made the person fearful, because he tried to use a bill that I guess was a fake bill to purchase something, and then he was outside acting weird, and they, in their police call, said that this person was obviously distorted and on drugs. When he is put into handcuffs and is put against the wall, a baggie of what looks to be like cocaine or it's white. It's a white baggie that he drops onto the floor that you can see in an image. If you look up the clip, the media is refusing to circulate it. You can find it on Twitter if you used.
Okay, so now she's demonizing George Floyd. At the end of the day, the police were called because he used a counterfeit bill, or that was the reason they were called, over a counterfeit bill. She's saying that the person who called said he was out of his mind. I mean, at the end of the day, it's easy for someone like Candace Owens to take acting strange to out of their mind. He was not arrested because he was for possession of drugs. He was not called because he was a suspect of having drugs. He was called. The 911 was called because he was a suspect of using a counterfeit bill and was acting strangely. Now, as far as I'm concerned, none of these things justify being choked to death for 8 minutes and 44 seconds, something like that. We don't even give capital punishment. Isn't even being choked to death. It's using lethal injection. We've gone away from killing tools such as electrocution simply because they are inhumane. We have a constitution that prevents us and protects us from no cruel or unusual punishments. Now, I don't know about you, but choking a man for 8 minutes, or close to 9 minutes, that is cruel and unusual. That's not how any person deserves to be treated. And not to mention the fact that we have a constitution that says that we are innocent until proven guilty. Now, I don't understand. You're here saying that, what the officer did was wrong, but George Floyd is also a demon? Like, what is that? I don't understand that, and that personally upsets me.
Now, barring all of that, nobody thinks that he should have died during this arrest, but what I find despicable to be is that everyone is pretending that this man lived a heroic lifestyle.
He was not arrested for drugs. George Floyd, I don't necessarily know the reasoning for his arrest. What I mean, though, the police were not called necessarily for drugs. They were called because a man used a counterfeit bill and was acting oddly. Like, to keep saying, arrested drugs, eventually you're just going to make your supporters think that he was arrested because of the drugs. When in the reality of the situation is, all of these things are it's all circumstantial here. Like, to say that, George Floyd is the demon because he had drugs in his pocket and that's because he was arrested, you're not really quantifying that or kind of giving ground to any of that in this video. You're just saying, look it up. Like, personally, I would have liked to actually have any evidence of that. As far as I'm concerned, this is just continual demonizing of George Floyd. I'm not necessarily saying that George Floyd is the greatest person alive. I'm simply saying that the way he was killed was wrong, and that's really all that needs to be said. You don't need to start demonizing George Floyd to say that this was wrong. Like, in my opinion, demonizing George Floyd in an effort to get some people, even if it's not all people, to think that Derek Chauvin was okay is wrong. And even though she's saying, Derek Chauvin was wrong and that he's yet facing punishment, then if that's how it truly is, like, why are you making this video? You're making this video to demonize George Floyd. What is the purpose of demonizing George Floyd if it would not be to give ground or give ammunition to people who would be supporting the Derek Chauvin?
Accept the narrative that this person
what is this,
a
Candace
martyr,
Owens?
or should be lifted up in the black community, and that we should be buying T-shirts with his name on it. Okay, so here we have first and
It's not about George Floyd the man. It's about what happened to him. He did not deserve death. Like, I don't understand what she's saying here. She keeps trying to say that people are thinking that he is an angel and that he was killed. Maybe there are those people out there, but as far as I'm concerned, what truly is horrifying is the way he was killed. It was not just. It was not justice. We have a system that is built upon innocent until proven guilty. Now, where is that justice system? Even if a baggie fell out of his pocket, they would not have been able to test it, or they would not have been able to know what it is necessarily without being able to test it. Like, there is some lunacy to this argument.
And I believe in second chances, but I do draw the line when it comes to second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth chances. 1998, he spent 10 months in prison for theft with a firearm. That was the first prison stint that I could find on him. In 2002, he spent 8 months in prison for a cocaine offense. In 2004, just 2 years later, he spent another 10 months in prison for a cocaine offense. In 2005, he spent another 10 months in prison for having less than 1 gram of cocaine on him again. In 2007, and this was the biggest instant that I had that made me realize this was a horrible human being that I am not going to pretend was a good person. In 2005, a woman who was pregnant received a knock at the door, and she went to the door, and the person pretended to be someone that worked for the water department. So she opened her door and quickly realized that the person at her door did not work for the water department and attempted to slam it. At the moment that she was attempting to slam it, a Ford pulled up and another 5 men jumped out of the car, and one of which was George Floyd, came up to the door, and they forced their way inside to her home, inside of her home. Mind you, this woman is pregnant. At that point, George Floyd took out a gun and pressed it to her stomach. She was screaming, begging for her life, and he put her inside of her living room and instructed one of his criminal friends that was with him to watch her and to make sure she didn't leave the living room. So he was playing guard while they ransacked her home looking for drugs and money. They did not find drugs. They ended up taking, I believe, her wallet and her cell phone. Fortunately for her, her neighbor observed what was going on and caught the license plate of the people as they pulled off and called 911. And when 911 was able to, they were able to track down the car of which George Floyd was the driver, and they arrested him. And 2 years later, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for that instance. Now, you can say the
Again, this is all just general demonization. What does any of this have to do with the fact that he died? How does any of this justify the fact that he died? You're saying he shouldn't be considered a martyr. I'm saying if he is being considered a martyr, it's simply because what was done to him was wrong. I mean, in the last month, we have had 3 black people who have been shot dead for unjust reasons. 2 of which were at the hands of law enforcement. So I don't understand your point here. At the end of the day, George Floyd, this outrage sparked by his death was simply the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, I don't quite understand this argument. You keep trying to demonize George Floyd. If you were really about justice, you wouldn't be demonizing the man. You would be talking about Derek Chauvin. Like, I don't quite understand what this is. She's pulling up his, his criminal record. To my knowledge, George Floyd is in his 40s. So, as far as I understand, the first time he was put in jail was for theft with a weapon. And that was in, I think she said 1998. That was 22 years ago, which would mean that George Floyd was more or less still a kid. To me, I'm not necessarily saying that it was right, but again, when you combine the fact that percentage-wise, African Americans or Black Americans have the highest poverty percentage within their cultural group, it's not surprising that a person in poverty reacts to their situation emotionally and acts in a criminal manner. I'm not justifying the situation. I'm just saying from a psychological and an emotional standpoint, it makes sense. I can see how someone goes to this extreme. The next several offenses that he was arrested for appear, according to her words, to all be non-violent offenses. So after the first time, which was not necessarily violent, it was theft with a weapon, he had several offenses that were all drug-related, which are non-violent offenses, according to her. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm a person who, as a kid, screwed up my life and got into a relatively serious situation. So theft with a weapon is a serious charge, and it's going to stain your reputation forever. If I'm a kid who screws up, and then I find myself continuously going to prison for or getting arrested for non-violent cases, I can understand how slowly someone breaks from a psychological standpoint. I can understand that. It's not to justify the actions. I firmly believe that the laws are the law, and if you break the law, you break the law. But I think it's difficult when you have a group of people who are at the lower end of the economy, and then expect that they're not going to react to situations emotionally. She then continues to say that after all of these cocaine offenses, or cocaine or heroin offenses, that he, along with a group of men, broke into a woman's house and robbed her at gunpoint. Now, this is terrible. There's no justification for that. Again, coming from the psychological standpoint, we can understand what drives someone to crime. The emotions and the irrationality tend to drive us into committing crimes. I'm not justifying the action. It was wrong, and he was arrested for it. I have actually, though, seen various political memes for George Floyd that have accused him of rape in this situation. As far as I understand, that is completely misguiding the population by saying that he raped someone. As far as I understand, he served 5 years for this armed robbery, if he was convicted for rape, he wouldn't have gone for just 5 years. So let's continue.
And moved and was going to start afresh. I'd like to believe all of those things, and there's a gap, and he never got in trouble for 5 years until this incident when the police were called on him again. But you are defying common sense to believe that this person suddenly became an exemplary character but happened to be high on fentanyl and methamphetamine. And
again, being high on any drug, as long as you are nonviolent, is a nonviolent offense. I'm not justifying breaking the law. I'm not justifying getting high illegally. Again, we can look from not necessarily again, but we can see from a psychological standpoint why people are pushed to drugs. It's as far as this narrative is being portrayed from her, it's pretty clear that George Floyd was in that 20.8% of Black Americans who are of the lower economical standpoint. We can understand why people are pushed to committing crime, and we can understand why people seek out drugs for relief in a stressful time. To be completely honest, even me, just trying to look at all the information unbiasedly and listen to a plethora of news sources and a plethora of political opinions, it's exhausting. As it's stressful to be a human, and I can't even begin to understand what it would be like to screw up when I was in my late teens or early 20s, only to see that my entire life is now screwed up for a mistake I made all that time ago. I mean, it's difficult for me to see Candace Owens' point in this. It's easy to twist a narrative to make a villain. I can look at Candace Owens, actually. Candace Owens, if I want to demonize Candace Owens and try to delegitimize Candace Owens, at the end of the day, Candace Owens, to my knowledge, now again, I could always have some inconsistencies or being incorrect somewhere, Candace Owens went to school for journalism. She dropped out her senior year, so technically she does not have any college degree. We can also see that Candace Owens started her career as a writer, left-wing writer. She was originally a Democrat. We can also see that Candace Owens started a project. She wanted to create an app or a software that essentially cyberbullied. We can also see that as she was trying to develop this, she saw a lot of backlash. People were calling her a bully because she was trying to cyberbullies. We can also see that after this, she then became a Republican and became right-wing, condemning the left-wing side. So, to be honest, we can paint a narrative that says she necessarily didn't have the educational qualifications to be a political speaker. She tried to make a software to cyberbullies, which is essentially the concept of two wrongs don't make a right. And then we can see that after that, she went to a side that would open her or welcome her with open arms. We can paint that narrative. It's not very difficult. I don't, again, I've been saying it a lot, understand this logic that she's trying to use. She's trying to say that George Floyd is essentially a demon, but she's also saying that Derek Chauvin was wrong. So I don't understand what you're fighting against. You don't like the idea that George Floyd is being seen as a martyr, but he's not being seen as a martyr because of his criminal past. He's being seen as a martyr because he was killed brutally. Was it right that he was killed brutally? Should we simply forget that he was killed brutally simply because he has a criminal record? Now, that is, in my opinion, ludicrous. This is absolutely ludicrous. At this point, though, I see that my video is taking a substantial amount of time. I will want to stop here. We are 8 minutes and 20 seconds into this 18-minute and 12-minute video. I will be following this up with a part 2 video, finishing the rest of the video, but I would like to stop here. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them in the comments below. And if you have any opinions on this situation, or you see any statistical inconsistencies with my arguments, please let me know. At the end of the day, I'm not here for a political agenda. I am not paid by any media service. I'm not paid by any political party. I am here because I'm tired of seeing all across the United States how we have so much of a divide over politics when many of us aren't even willing to go out and look at this other side to the story. It's incredibly difficult to look at all the information out there. And I can't say that I always look at every single piece of information. But this George Floyd case, I can say that I have read a lot of news articles from a lot of different news media agencies. I've also talked with a lot of people who all have different political ideologies and all have different stances on this situation. I've seen political cartoons ranging from Black Lives Matter ones that is condemning his killing, and I've seen ones that are condemning him as a person. I saw one that essentially argued for, or tried to justify abrasive use of force against George Floyd because calling him a rapist and a thief. So with that said, I want to leave this, kind of jump away from this video now. It's interesting for me as a person who is not sponsored by anyone, who is not making money from anyone, trying to accumulate and use legitimate information as best as I can, looking at people who have political agendas. Candace Owens has a political agenda. She has supporters who love these videos. She does not care about the people like me or anyone else who disagree with her arguments because she has a lot of people who love her as a black woman talking against or speaking out against racism. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one.